So, Joe Barbaro, the man, the myth, the legend. One of the most favourable characters in Mafia 2, as we all know, and one of the biggest cliffhangers in gaming history. Where is the inspiration behind him? We're going to take a look at that today. So, we love Joe Barbaro because of his personality and the way he got stuff done in Mafia 2. But as we all know, every character of everything has inspiration from someone or somewhat. And today we're going to be getting into who that person is, or people. As we know, there's two people inside this video. We're going to start off with the first one, which is Joe Barbosa. Here he is now, and obviously there's going to be a lot of differences, but there are some similarities to Joe Barbaro and Joe Barbosa. So let's get into it. So basically his background: he was born Joseph Barbosa, and he was Portuguese American. He wasn't actually Italian, and he was a really skilled chef, and he actually went to some culinary schools and passed them, and he obviously knew how to cook Portuguese cuisine and French cuisine. And he would also cook for his crew and all his friends and family and stuff. And he spoke 3 languages, believe it or not, which was quite amazing for someone in his background. I can barely speak one, and he was actually fluent in Portuguese, Italian and Spanish, and obviously English. And that was due to self-education. He was born in Massachusetts, so he was based around Boston, and he was married with 2 children, and his nickname was The Animal. And as you know, Barbosa in Barbaro in Joe Barbaro means the barbarian, so there's some kind of similarity between them two. And I'm about to tell you how he actually he coined the nickname The Animal. So let's remember, this was probably on a nice summer evening. He was at a club in, I think it's called Rivera, something like that, in Massachusetts. And he was at a club and he had an altercation with someone, and he slapped them, and then the underboss of the Patriarca family, called Henry Tamaleo, stepped in and said that he couldn't hit that man. So instead of hitting him, he actually bit him on the ear. Some people say he bit somebody's cheek off, but there wasn't any evidence to prove that. And he said, "I didn't touch him with my hands," and he snarled at him. So that's quite ballsy, to be quite honest. But he just showed you that he wasn't like right in the head, to be honest. Like, doing that, he bit someone's ear. I don't know if he bit it off or bit a chunk of it off, but he bit someone's ear. And the fact that he was a little bit cheeky to one of the underbosses of the family, so that's got to take a lot of balls. But it just shows you that he didn't really give a fuck, to be honest, just like Joe Barbaro. In 1949 he started his light heavyweight professional boxing career, like his father, and he had a fight in El Paso, Texas in 1949. And it doesn't say whether he won or lost. It's not on his career record, so I don't think it was like a proper official fight or something like that. But he was nicknamed the Baron, and this is his fighting record. He won 8 out of 12 matches, and 5 of them ended out in a knockout. So he was let's just say he had a very strong uppercut, or maybe a haymaker. And he continued his career from 1958 to 1961 after he got out of prison, but we're about to talk about his prison time right now. So 1 year after he started his light professional boxing career, he was sent to prison in 1950 to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution, Concord, for 5 years. And 3 years later, in 1953, he actually started a prison break, believe it or not, with 6 other fellow inmates. And they overpowered the prison guards and raced away in 2 separate cars, believe it or not. That just shows you how bad the prisons were back then, that they could actually just drive away. And they just started, they just started going to bars in Boston. They just started going driving around, beating random people up in the street, believe it or not, in Scully Square, if any of you are frequented in Boston. And they just wandered the neighborhoods of Lynn and Revere. As we've talked about before, Revere was the place that he bit that guy's ear off, or bit into his ear. but they were finally apprehended at a subway station in East Boston, and then they were returned to prison. So in 1958, when he was paroled, he got associated with the Patriarca family, and eventually started his own little crew, and he had a little place on Bennington Street and Brook Street, which is in Boston, which became known among the local criminals as Barbosa's Corner. Barbosa's, sorry. And he had a little stick-up crew which had about 5, 7, even 10 people in maybe, and it was supervised for the Patriarca family by Stephen Fleming, and as you know, he was part of the Winter Hill Gang, which were the Irish who were in South Boston, headed by the Whitey Bulger. And by 1966, Barbosa was eventually one of the Boston's most prolific contract killers and sidewalk soldiers, but obviously because he wasn't Italian and he was Portuguese, he couldn't actually be inducted into the family and be made. And so he ran his own crew, but associated himself with the Patriarca crime family and did odd jobs for them, and obviously, as I've just said, contract killings. So in 1966, it is widely believed that because of Barbosa's influence now in Boston as one of the best contract killers you can get, he started doing killings for the boss himself, Raymond Patriarca. And because he ran his own little crew, but he wasn't Italian and he wasn't actually part of any family, he started like recklessly leading his crew into doing things and gaining more attention from the police, which the family didn't actually like, and they started trying to get rid of him, if you know what I mean. Like, he was shot outside his house, but he survived, and when he was arrested, his bail was posted to 100 grand, and it wasn't posted by the families. They just left him in jail to rot, and when his crew tried to gain money to get him out of jail, they were actually killed as well. So he obviously got a clear image that they didn't want to be associated with him anymore. And then the FBI started trying to get Barbosa to become an informant, and more of his men and friends were getting killed by the day, and he eventually gave in and then became an informant, because he was actually imprisoned in 1967 for murder, and then eventually testified against Raymond Patriarca before becoming one of the first informants to enter the witness protection program. The government also gave him false promises, saying that his wife and children wouldn't be protected until he agreed to testify, and that they were going to set him up with his own restaurant and give him plastic surgery to change his appearance to protect Barbosa, but they didn't do most of this. I think they protected his family, but they didn't give him a restaurant, and they didn't even give him plastic surgery. And once again, like I just said, Barbosa went on to testify against the Patriarca family, and a lot of them were actually indicted for the conspiracy to murder in 1966. And because he declined a bribe from the families of 50 grand, they tried to kill Barbosa while the trials were going on in 1968, and that resulted in them planting a bomb on the bottom of his attorney's car, and that took the attorney's right leg, but it didn't even harm Barbosa. And eventually in 1968, Henry, Louis Greco and Ronald Casesso were sentenced to death, but then it was overturned to a life imprisonment. And the funny part is that it was actually a false imprisonment, and they were actually innocent. They didn't actually kill the person that they were found guilty of killing, and their families were actually given money. I think it was in the 90s, because Henry died in 86, I think. It was in the 80s somewhere. But Barbosa was only given 1 year prison term, which including the time he served, and he was eventually paroled in 1969 and relocated to California, and then he enrolled into the culinary arts. And he said he used to boast that he killed over 20 people as well, so killing over 20 people and having 1 year prison term, he must have had a hell of a lawyer, who is one leg got less now. So eventually he was charged with killing another person again, even after He did all his time and he was a free man. So in 1971 he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was charged for 5 years at Folsom Prison. And then while he was in prison he became an amateur poet and wrote poems about the mob and his own fiercelessness about Boston and stuff like that. And then eventually Barbosa was once again paroled in 1975 and then moved into a little shitty apartment as under the alias as Joseph Donati. And in 1976 he went to San Francisco to visit a hoodlum friend called James Chalmers, and he was from South Boston, and I think he's a consigliere, Gennaro Angiolo. I'm really bad with names. He found out where Barbosa was, and obviously because he's part of the Patriarca family, he sent gunmen to kill him, and then Barbosa was killed after he left Chalmers' apartment. And while he was walking to his car, he was hit by 4 shotgun blasts at close range and was killed instantly. And that is the end of Barbosa, and he died on that street. But just thinking about it, his personality, apparently he was said to be actually a pretty good guy. Apparently he used to take neighborhood kids as well as his own kids to the zoo and buy popcorn for kids who didn't have popcorn at the cinemas and stuff. So apparently he was a good guy, but he was just like one screw loose of normal. You can see some of Joe Barbaro in him, seeing as his personal appearance as well as a bit of his personality, as he was a bit obnoxious, shown from the incident in Revere when he bit that guy's ear, and he was a bit cheeky to Henry Tamalio. And the differences to him and Joe Barbaro were the fact that he wasn't actually Italian and he was never part of the mob. He was just an associate and he had his own crew. And moving on to Giuseppe Joe Barbaro, the only thing that connects him with Joe Barbaro is his actual name and his appearance and the fact that he's Italian. Giuseppe Barbaro was a leader of a family in Italy, and it is known that his second name was Barbaro and his nickname was Joe, so put 2 and 2 together, you get Joe Barbaro. And that was it. That was the real life Joe Barbaro, Joe Barbosa. If you just look about you can obviously tell that he had some influence towards Joe Barbaro's character, as they are like similar, but Joe Barbaro just was not as crazy as Barbosa. He was more level-headed until he had some alcohol, and then he just shoots random black people. That was it. Yeah, subscribe and like for some more, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.